Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing another episode of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got quite an interesting assortment of animals that we're going to have a look at. I wonder if I actually did. Yeah, I did that. But anyway, we're going to have a look at some really cool animals. A few exhibit animals, as you can see, but a few extinct ones, and a few really cool other additions, including a marine one, which I'm quite excited to get stuck into. So we're going to be starting off first by viral cyclops. We've got the Barrington land iguana. So let's have a look at these guys. Really cute guy. Let's see if you can find another one that's... Ooh, no, they're all kind of not in the best position, I think. I'll have a look at you. You're probably the one in the best light. Really cool. This is the Barrington Lang iguana, or Colnophilus pallidurus, if you say that. So these guys are also known as the Santa Fe land iguana. And these are species of lizard in the family Iguanidae. It's related to other iguanas. It's one of the 3 species in the genus Colophus and is endemic or only found on the Santa Fe Island in the Galapagos, which is quite interesting. So it was first described by American zoologist Edmund Heller in 1903, and some authorities question whether this was actually its own species or a subspecies of the Galapagos land iguana found on other islands, but it seems that these guys are now considered their own species, which is quite cool. And their specific name pallidus stands for pale because they are quite more pale than your land iguanas. So they're really cool. So that you can see morphologically, they are quite similar to the Galapagos land iguana, except the Santa Fe land iguana are typically a little bit more pale-ish, like a pale yellow, with a longer, more tapered snout and more pronounced dorsal spikes. There's a little bit of difference between them. They grow in a total length from about, including tail, about 9.1 meters, about 3 feet long, and can weigh to about 11 kilograms. And being cold-blooded, they absorb heat by sitting on the volcanic rocks that are found across the island of Santa Fe. And then at night they will sleep in burrows to help conserve that body heat, so they're quite good at doing that. And these iguanas are actually quite interesting. They have a symbiotic relationship with the finches on the Galapagos. So the birds will remove parasites and ticks, so that'll provide the relief for the iguana, so the iguana's free of ticks and parasites, and then the birds get a good meal, obviously because they get to eat all the ticks that are on them, so that's quite cool, isn't it? Another cool example of it's like symbolism or like symbiotic relationships, mutualism in nature. In terms of diet, like most other species of iguanas, they are primarily herbivorous, though they have been shown to eat like insects or carrion or centipedes when they get the opportunity to, but most animals that are herbivores will do that. But mostly they eat vegetation. And because their fresh water is often quite rare to find on the islands they live on, especially on Santa Fe, they obtain a majority of the moisture that they drink from the prickly pear cactus, which makes up to about 80% of their diet, but they will also eat fruits, flowers, pads, and even spines, so they eat a lot of prickly pear cactus. And during the raining season, they will drink from pools and feast on yellow flowers in the genus Portulura, which is quite interesting. So these guys are quite well adapted for the little island they live on. They are considered vulnerable, just mainly because of this small area that they live in. It's pretty tropical. Yeah, really cool regardless. I'm definitely a big fan of these guys. So anyway, we're going to move on. Again, that was done by Viral Cyclops. Next one was done by Tosco DS. We might just call him DS. We've got another one. We've got the Eyelash Viper. So let's have a look at these guys. Little cuties. Let's see if you can find one. I thought they were all different morphs last time I grabbed them. No, they are. I think so. Yeah, they're different morphs. So have a look at this one, since this one's sitting in a nice position to look at. So this is Eyelash Viper. So Borolithus scagelli, I believe you say that. So they're commonly known as eyelash vipers, and they're a species of venomous snake within the family Viperidae. So they are they are relatively small species of pit viper. Adults typically range from 55 to 82 centimeters, or about 22 to 32 inches in length, with females being longer and more bearable in size than males, who typically grow about 27 inches, about 69 centimeters. But you can see they've got that wide triangular head and eyes with vertical slits, And like all pit vipers, they are sort of phalanges which have large hypodermic needles like fangs in the front of the upper jaw that fold back, and also have heat-sensitive pits that allow them to detect, the animal's heat signatures as well. Though their most distinguishing feature is the set of scales above their eyes, where they get the name the eyelash viper. So this is believed to aid in camouflage, so it breaks out the outline of the snake, but they also come in a wide range of colours as well, such as red, yellow, brown, green, even pink. And they often will have black or brown speckling, and there's not really much differences between the two sexes. So in terms of their common names, as I mentioned, they're called eyelash vipers, eyelash pit viper, eyelash palm viper, any variation of that, eyelash something, eyelash viper, things like that. That's typically English. And these guys range from southern Mexico or southwest of the Atlantic plains and the lowlands of Central America to northern South America around Colombia, Venezuela. They're also found in Pacific areas, so like Costa Rica, Panama, Peru, things like that. So quite a wide range. And they can be found in forests up to about 8,000 feet in the air, which is quite cool. In terms of their habitat, they prefer lower altitude, very humid tropical areas with dense foliage, generally not far from a permanent water source. But they have been found in a lot of ravines and things like that, which is quite interesting. But they've been known to inhabit a lot of different locations from different altitudes, so they're quite well adapted for most habitats, but for areas with permanent water sources, probably because they have lots of small prey, such as birds, amphibians, and reptiles that they can feed on. And like other species of vipers, these types of species of the genus, they are arboreal, and they have a strong prehensile tail that allows them to climb. They're also largely nocturnal and feed on all sorts of small rodents, frogs, lizards, and small birds, and are not known to be aggressive, but will not hesitate to strike if you piss them off, pretty much. They're a typical ambush predator like other species. What they do is they wait patiently for prey to wander by. Sometimes they've been known to select an ambush site each year when the birds return for spring. They've also been known to use what's called caudal luring, where they move their tail like a worm that attracts a bird and then they can attack, which is quite interesting. And also they're quite venomous. The most important component of their venom is actually phosphorylate A2, which is what's dangerous. They cause like tissue damage, things like that, and it's really, really dangerous. And so the snake bite typically is like by pain, a bite of blisters, and even local necrosis or just dead tissue. So there's been lots of research, and like even renal failure can be if it's prolonged. So an animal we definitely don't want to be bitten by. But yeah, still quite cool. The eyelash viper, in terms of reproduction, they typically reach sexual maturity about 2 years of age, and they're ovoviviparous. So species that reproduce throughout the year. So females will carry eggs for about 6 months before they hatch internally, and that's when the young complete the development. Pregnant females typically have enlarged lower abdomens, but may stop eating in the later stages of pregnancy. A typical brood will give birth between 2 to 20 live young, and they're each about 15 to 20 or 6 to 8 inches long, and pretty much appear like little mini versions of the adults. And males will actually sometimes, when they're mating, they'll engage in an hours-long courtship called the Dance of the Adders, where two males will posture and try to intimidate each other in an upright cobra-like stance and try and push each other around. And they are polygamous and typically usually mate at night. They are kind of kept in captivity. They are frequently available and can be found in zoos and available in the exotic pet trade. And they're typically bred because they've got all sorts of different colours and patterns, as you kind of see here. See all these different colours and patterns going on. You can see that's like a lighter one. It's kind of like, you can see all the different colours and patterns that are represented here, which is quite interesting. Well, I'll look at you because you've got all the best patterns on you, like that. Importing them from the wild is not as common as they once was because it is not unknown. Typically, captive bred is the way to go because they're usually well adapted to captivity and all that. And they actually are readily fed mice and do quite well. And there are sometimes a subspecies described the eyelash mountain viper, but some pretty much just refer to it as the blotched palm pit viper. And they have not been evaluated by the IUCN in 2022. While they're not listed as threatened, there is the threat of things like increased deforestation, urbanization, and agriculture could be a threat to these guys. But overall, they're doing quite well. Really, really cool guys. How can you not love an eyelash viper? Very, very cool. So that was done by Tosco DS, and next up we've got another one by Leaf and Nick. We've got a very interesting little guy here. We've got the naked mole rats, so we've got to find them. They're just so little, they can be so hard to find. So there's the naked mole rat. There's a good look at them. So naked mole rat, or Heterocephalus galba, also known as sand puppies, which is a funny name. They're a burrowing rodent that's native to the Horn of Africa and parts of Kenya, particularly around Somalia. They're closely related to Bell's moles and are the only species in the genus Heterocephalus. So we'll get to why these guys are so weird. I'm sure you've heard a little bit about these naked mole rats. So typical individuals are about 8 to 10 centimeters, or about 3 to 4 inches long, and weigh between 30 to 35 grams, or about 11 to 1.1 to 1.2 ounces. But females are typically much larger, with females getting about 50 grams, or about 1.8 ounces, and sometimes the largest reaching about 2.8 ounces, or about 80 grams. And they're quite well adapted for their life underground. They've got small eyes with poor eyesight. They have thin legs, but are quite well adapted for moving underground. They've got large protruding teeth that they use to dig, and they're also, a quarter of their musculature is used for closing their jaws when they dig, so they've got quite strong jaws that they use to dig. Their incisors, like most rodents, will grow continuously throughout their lives, so it allows them to dig. But other than that, they have very little hair and have like pink or yellowish skin, where they get their name naked mole rat, because they're not very hairy, which is quite interesting as well. But there's a lot of very interesting adaptations that these guys have had to live their lifestyle. They're actually well adapted for the oxygen within limited availability of oxygen in the tunnels. They have underdeveloped lungs, and their hemoglobin has a high affinity for oxygen, so it basically increases their efficiency. They also have a very low metabolic rate and respiration rate for an animal of its size, about 70% that of a mouse, so it uses not quite as much. And the naked mole rat can spend at least 5 hours in air that it contains only 5% oxygen and do not show any sign of distress. They can also live in an atmosphere of 80% CO2 and 20% oxygen, and they do quite well in those. And they can heart rate, doing it when they lose consciousness, their heart rate can actually drop down from 200 to 50 beats per minute. And when deprived of oxygen, they'll use fructose to kind of, and the anaerobic glycosyl separate lactic acid, so they are able to survive, which is quite interesting. I think it's just such an interesting evolutionary adaptation these guys have. We'll also talk about some other things. They're also very interesting, is that they're the only mammal that's deemed to be thermoconformers, which is very interesting, rather than thermoregulators. So unlike other mammals, their body temperature tracks ambient temperature. However, it's claimed that naked mole rats have a distinct temperature and activity rhythm that is not coupled with an environment. So their relationship between oxygen consumption and ambient temperature from a typical poikilothermic pattern is kind of interesting. So they typically use, for example, how they maintain their body temperature. They'll huddle or seek shallow parts of their burrow that are warmed by the sun when they get too cold. But when they get too hot, they'll retreat deeper into their dens, so they're able to move across the dens and things like that to better regulate their body temperature. So that's quite interesting as well. There are also some other really interesting adaptations. They lack a lot of neurotransmitters, so they basically don't feel pain as much as a lot of other animals. So they're basically almost like a superhero, like feel no pain. I can't think of a superhero that doesn't feel no pain. There must be a few. I can't think of any off the top of my head. But also as well, they're quite resistant to cancer. They're highly resistant. There's lots of research of it because that could help humans, look into them. And it seems to be part of their genes. There seems to be a gene responsible, an HMWHA, the naked mole rat, that actually they put into mice and lead to improved health and increased median lifespan for mice. So there's some genes in there that could actually really help humans and deal with cancer, which is really, really interesting. And they actually they can live longer than any other rodents. So comparison, they have lifespans in excess of 37 years, with the next longest lived rodent being the African porcupine at 28 years. And the mortality rate actually does not increase with age, and thus doesn't conform to the kind of, and they're also, as I mentioned, highly resistant to cancer, so that is pretty much part of the reason why they live so long. The reasons for longevity is debated, but probably because of slower metabolism, also better genetics, things like that. Well, not better genetics, but more resistant to cancer, more resistant to slower metabolism, things like that could lead to their longer lifespan. So it's a really interesting part of how they live. And they also have been lots of research into their DNA to kind of help people, with gene therapies and things like that, which is really interesting. And also size, what else is really, really weird we'll go into. We'll talk about their habitat. As I mentioned, their habitat, they live around Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia. These guys live in clusters or kind of habitats, very similar to like insects. They are eusocial, so they can live with 75 to 80 individuals in complex burrows that can be between 3 to 5 kilometers in cumulative length, which is quite interesting. So the roles is very similar. They're one of two species of eusocial mammals currently known. So their societies are actually very similar to like ants, termites, and species of wasps and bees. So there's one female that's the queen. She's the biggest, and she produces all the babies. And then there's 1 to 3 males that reproduce with her, and then the rest of the females are workers. So the queen and breeding males are able to breed about a year of age. Workers are sterile as they work to maintain the nest and everything. And the non-reducing females actually need to be suppressed, which means their ovaries do not mature by the hormones of the male, the leading female, I mean. So that's quite cool. So the queen is actually can live quite long. So queens can live between 13 to 18 years, and they're extremely hostile to other females behaving like queens by producing hormones. Typically, gestation for these guys is about 70 days, with a litter typically being between 3 to 12 pups. But they may actually be as large as 28, with the average being 11. In the wild, they usually breed once a year, but if a litter survives, but in captivity, they can breed all year round and produce a litter every 80 days. The young are born blind and weigh about 2 grams, and the queen will nurse them for the first month, and then the other ones will feed them fecal pulp until they're old enough to eat solid food. There's also the workers, so they're smaller workers that like maintain the tunnels and acquire food. Then there's the dispersers that prevent inbreeding. So how they do is that they are kind of they're morphologically different, so they'll seek out and leave the burrow once they get the chance, and then go find another burrow to mate with them, which is quite interesting. And also, reproductively active female naked mole rats tend to associate with unfamiliar males. So these males, the dispersers will go out and find a new female and kind of to reduce inbreeding, which is quite interesting. So in terms of their diet, these guys feed primarily on tubers, and they live deep underground. A singular tuber can actually provide a long-term source of food for the colony, lasting even years. And they eat the inside of the bud, but leave the outside so the tuber can regenerate. There's also symbiotic bacteria that in their intestines that will ferment the fibers and allows them to digest the cellulose and turn them into fatty acids that they can use. They'll also sometimes eat their own feces, and this may be part of their social behavior. That means they can share hormones from the queen. And in terms of predators, they typically preyed upon by snakes, such as the rufous bearded snake and the Kenyan sand boa, along with other species of raptors. But the most vulnerable is when they're constructing mounds or ejecting soil from the surface. That's when they're most in danger. But typically they're underground, so they get exposed too much. They're quite numerous and also widespread, so they're not at any risk of extinction. They are considered least concern. But yeah, definitely a really, really cool little guy to talk about. And I can love a cool little naked mole rat. It's quite awesome to talk about these guys. I never thought I'd get the chance to. But yeah, really, really cool. Such an interesting little animal, aren't they? And like being just like a eusocial mammal, that's so weird. They're like a beehive, but like rats. So that's just so interesting to me. But yeah, that was done by Leaf and Nick. Next up, we've got the California beaver, also done by Leaf and Nick. So this is extinct animals. So let's have a look at these guys. So this is an extinct species of beaver that lived in the parts of western North America during the end of the Miocene to the early Pliocene. And they were first discovered in the Kettleman Hills in California, in the United States. They are considered similar, but a little bit larger than the extant, North American beaver. But which is also weird as well. They have, unlike other members of the Castor genus, they have 3 enamel folds. So that's a little thing that makes them distinct. And they have determined to be the earliest type of their genus. So this was the first beaver to get into North America, so probably around the Miocene. These are characterized by short nasal passages, and the backs of their skull is actually quite wide compared to a lot of other ones. So there's a little bit of variation between them. And compared to other species as well, they also had wider metatarsals, which aid them for swimming and digging. So they may have been a little bit better swimmers, which is interesting. And they have, as I mentioned, like that. But yeah, there's not too much different. They've been found, as I mentioned, quite a bit over the place. California, up to Oregon, and into central US, like Wyoming, things like that. So quite a wide range. But yeah, really, really cool. You can see different colors and patterns. I believe Leaf put the Wolverine on this guy, so he's just got a Wolverine pattern to him, which actually does fit quite well. And it's nice to see a little bit of variation within these different animals. I really do love them. Another great paleo mod by Leaf and Nick. And a really cute baby too, all fluffy. Really, really cool. Definitely a big fan. So next up we got another extinct species. This one's done by Great Cakes mod. We all love Great Cakes mods, of course. We have got Arsinotherium. So a really, really cool one. If you remember Sea Monsters with Nigel Marvin, you'll recognize this guy. So Arsinotherium is a paleoungulate, a paraungulate mammal that belongs to the extinct group Emberomorpha. So this was an Afrothere, so they are related to elephants, sirens, or like dugongs and manatees, and hyraxes. But they convergently evolved to look like a rhinoceros, so they're very superficially rhinoceros-like, but more closely related to elephants and hyraxes than they are to rhinos, which are perissodactyls. They lived during the late Eocene to the early Oligocene of North Africa, from about 36 to 30 million years ago. It lived in tropical rainforests and mangrove swamps. And then there was another species of this Gigantium in 2004 that lived in Ethiopia about 27 million years ago. So there's a couple different species. There is 3 described ones. This one is Arsinotherium zithi, which is the most well known. So this is the best known and first described species. Another one is found in Ethiopia, but these guys are a little bit older. So these teeth far larger than those of A. zithi was found in there. And there's also relatives of Arsinotherium have been found in southern Europe, such as Daviferium, Hispanella, and Paleomasa, which are all Arsinotherium relatives. Generic name comes from Pharaoh Astori II, who was after whom the fellow Oasis, where the first fossils were found. And the ancient Greek means beast, so it's basically the Astori beast, so named after a pharaoh. And the specific species of the type species zithi, which means it's given to honor a German paleontologist, Karl Alfred Ritter von Zittel, who actually was a pioneer of paleontology in Egypt, which is quite interesting. So adults of the species zithi got about 1.75 meters, or about 5'7" at the shoulder, and about 3 meters or 9 feet long, or just under 10 feet long, and measure 2.5 tons. So it's slightly smaller than a modern white rhino, so not too much of a big difference there. This is the male. Let's have a look at the female. Let's have a look at the female right here. There you are. So about that, and they're quite similar in a lot of ways to rhinos, but as I mentioned, convergently evolved. They were quite big, slow-moving animals with forelimbs adapted for pulling strongly backwards rather than forwards. I believe they actually could have walked a lot around stock, sticky ground and like mangroves, well adapted for mangroves and potentially swimming quite a bit. And fossils of sediments where these guys have been found, there seem to be a lot of warm, humid lowland forests, which is now Africa and Arabia, which is quite interesting. But the most notable features you can see is caused, especially on the male that we looked at before. They got these very large, enormous horns on their nose, and then a tiny knob-like kind of horns over their eyes. And this is superficially quite similar to those of bovids, but while reconstructions actually usually show them similar to ossicones of giraffe, each, like their bony core, may have been covered like the horn cores of bovids in keratin. So both males and females would have had these horns. And actually researching into them, they were initially the males and females were described as different species, so they have been lumped, and they've based on difference in body size and tooth size, they've been described as sexual dimorphism. But you can see also their hips are actually quite elephant-like, and their legs are quite columnar like elephants, so it's a lot of convergent evolution there. And they were definitely not built for running. They actually have a full 44 teeth, which is the primitive state of placental mammals. However, they're highly specialized for chewing and shifting their jaw to apply constant pressure across a continuous row of teeth. And this has been reconstructed as a highly selective browser, so potentially ate a lot of like trees and leaves and things like that. So quite a well-adapted browser. But yeah, let's have a look at this cute little baby. Look at this little guy. So as I mentioned, these guys have been found pretty much all over the place. Eocene, they lived around Oman, Namibia, and the Oligocene around Ethiopia, Kenya, Saudi Arabia, Angola, so quite a wide range. But yeah, really, really cool. I really love this reconstruction. I love that Great Cakes Mods is doing all sorts of really, really cool extinct species that I get to talk about, and plus then often not much is known about them, so it helps make these episodes a little bit shorter. But I like a good mix. Really cool animal to talk about. So next up, we got another Great Cakes mod. We have got one that I've got a special relation to because I actually did one for the Keeper Talk of the species. This is the California Condor. It's quite interesting. So let's have a look at these guys. So the California condor is the New World vulture and is the largest North American land bird. Sadly, they went extinct in the wild in 1987 when all the remaining individuals were captured, but has since been reintroduced to places like northern Arizona and southern Utah, California, and in Mexico, which is quite interesting. So in terms of taxonomy, it was first described by English naturalist George Shaw as Vultur californius, but is actually originally in the same genus as the Andean condor, but now is considered its own genus, which is well. So its name Gymnornis, which means bear vulture, and Californiensis refers to its location. It was found in California. But these guys are considered a New World vulture, so they're placed with other species of New World vultures. Though they appear quite similar to Old World, they're actually more closely related, of course, to Old World vultures, which is quite New World vultures, I mean. So it's a little bit of taxonomy here or there. It's quite interesting. So most recent authorities puts like the falconiformes along with Old World vultures and place them in their own group, which is kind of where these guys fit. And moving them from no world, so it's quite interesting as well. And it actually is believed the distribution of California condors today, even though it's a relic of a relic, they would have been found pretty much all across North America, and there's been some extinct species that have been found that would have kind of taken their niche, which is quite interesting. In terms of their description, they're typically a uniform black except for a large triangular patch or bands of white on their underwings. They also have grey legs or feet and a frill of back feathers surrounding their neck and brownish red eyes, with typically the juveniles being a little bit more of a mottled dark pattern with blackish eyes, and they've also got mottled grey instead of white under their feathers. In terms of their head, you can see they've also got quite a bare skull. Oh, well, bare head that's got no feathers, which helps to keep them clean when cleaning on carrion. And the skin of the head is actually capable of flushing, depending on the emotional state, and it can vary. The color can vary from yellowish to glowing reddish orange as well. And they do not have a syrinx like a lot of other species, but they can only make a few hissing and grunting sounds. So female condors are typically smaller than the male, which is actually weird. In a lot of birds, typically the female is bigger, which is the Andean condor, the males are bigger than the female. This is a baby. I'm pretty sure this is a baby. No, this is a female, I guess. She's elderly. But yeah, really, really cool regardless. So overall length is about 109 to 140 centimeters long, and a wingspan of about 2.4 to 3 meters, or about 8 feet to 9 feet 10 inches, so quite a wide range. And they get sizes range from about 7 to 14 kilograms, with estimates being on average about 8 to 19 kilograms. So between 15 to 31 pounds, and an average between 18 to 20 pounds. So, but there have been talks of condors over 3 meters reported, but none of over 10 feet have been recognized as official. And most measurements come from captive condors, so it's difficult to determine if there's major differences between captive and wild condors, which is probably not. They actually have also the largest wingspan of birds, any North American bird, but they're only surpassed in body length and weight only by the trumpeter and the introduced mute swan. Some have longer bodies, but these guys have the biggest wingspan, which is quite interesting. And also as well, these guys have a middle toe that is greatly elongated, with the hind toe only slightly developed, so they actually seem to have more similar stalks in that way, which is quite interesting. So by the time of human settlement, they were widespread across North America, with fossils being found in even Florida. But due to the end ice age with the extinction of the megafauna, these guys would likely decline because there was less prey for them to scavenge. And then they've been 500 years ago, they're typically found around the American Southwest to West Coast, and been documented around New Mexico, Texas, things like that. But then kind of declined then since. As we'll get into. The California condor typically likes scrubland, coniferous forests, and oak savanna, and can be found along large trees or cliffs where they're used for nesting, and they can travel up to 250 kilometers in search of carrion. In terms of their ecology behavior, they do not have their flight muscles anchored by a large sternum, so they don't have a big keel pretty much, which restricts them to being primarily soarers. And when they take off with the ground, they can actually glide for quite a wide distance. They can glide they've been known to fly at speeds about 90 kilometers an hour. as high as 15,000 feet, and they do that by riding thermals. They're also quite a long-lived species. They can live for about 60 years, and if they survive to adulthood, they have few natural threats, and as I mentioned, they don't make many sounds. They also perform euhydrosis, or defecate on their legs to reduce their body temperature, and they have a well-defined social structure within large groups, and they have a pecking order with play behavior and grunts and things like that to have a dominant hierarchy. So now we've had a look at the female, we're going to have a look at the babies about breeding. So this should be one of the babies. This should be a baby. This is a juvenile. So condors begin to look for a mate when they're about 6 years old, when they reach sexual maturity. And to attract a mate, they'll perform a display where the male will turn his head red and puffs out his neck feathers, and the female lowers her head, she'll accept him. And then the pair will make a simple nest on caves or cliffs, especially one that's near roosting trees. And then a mated female will lay one bluish-white egg every other year, so basically every 2 years. And eggs are laid typically as early as January and as late as April, with the egg weighing about 280 grams and measuring about 90 to 120 millimeters, or about 3.5 to 4.7 inches long. And if the egg is lost or removed, they can double clutch, with another one takes its place. And this has actually been quite taken advantage of in breeding in captivity, since you can just take one egg and they'll lay another one, so they're able to produce a lot more condors faster, so that's quite interesting. Typically, they take 53 to 60 days to incubate, and they'll incubate by both parents. They're born with their eyes open and sometimes take a week to kind of get out of their shell. The young are covered in a greyish brown and are usually almost as large as their parents, which is interesting. They are able to fly about after 5 to 6 months, but will continue to roost and forage with their parents until about their second year, and that's when they will typically turn their energies onto a new nest. Ravens are also the main predatory threat for condor eggs, and golden eagles and bears can potentially prey on offspring, but typically they're not found. But also as well, in 2021, there was a female in the San Diego Zoo that had 2 unfertilized eggs that produced male young by parthenogenesis, which is interesting. The mother had been housed with males and had mated before, but the offspring lacked markers of male paternity, so she gave birth to them, to clone them, which is interesting. In terms of their feeding, though, these guys are scavengers. They obviously travel large distances, 250 kilometers, in search of carrion. Let's have a look at the male again. So, in search of carrion, as I mentioned, that's not a male, that's a female. Is the male? So they lived at the time when they lived in the Pleistocene. There was lots of Pleistocene megafauna like mammoths, ground sloths, horses, all sorts of big animals, big bison. They lived with. Now they lived off the carcasses of them, but now they're mostly extinct. They still feed on lots of large animals though, such as like deer, goats, sheep, donkeys, pigs, horses, cattle, cougars, things like that. But also feed on rabbits, squirrels, also coyotes, and the aquatic mammals such as whales and sea lions where they live. But they typically feed on large mammal carcasses. And they actually do not have a good sense of smell. They actually will often spot their corpses by looking for other scavengers like eagles and smaller vultures, and use their large size and tougher hides to kind of bow through them and intimidate them and scare them off. But also can actually use their larger beaks to help break into them, so that allows them to get into them later. They can't scare off bears, but that's obviously because they're so much smaller than bears. And in the wild, they're intermittent eaters, so they often go a few days or even up to 2 weeks without eating, and then gorge themselves with about 1 to 1.5 kilos, or about 2.2 to 3.3 pounds of meat at once. So the conservation story of the condor is a very interesting story. It's actually one of the most expensive species conservation programs in the US history. It's about $35 million, so we'll get into that. So the recovery plan was pretty much, there was a big decline. People were asking what we're going to do with condors. A lot of people were arguing, should we let them go extinct, free, or should we bring into their captivity? And that was decided in kind of the 80s. They were decided to bring in captivity. And at the point, there was only 22 surviving condors. And then they were brought in captivity and then started a breeding program. So how they did the breeding program was they raised them in San Diego Wild Animal Park and Los Angeles Zoo, but other zoos took part. They basically took them in zoo, got them to double clutch, so they raised one by puppets, so they didn't get used to humans, and then one would be raised by the parents, so they were able to produce a lot of baby condors, and then basically were able to release them to the wild once the populations were big enough. So then in 1998, they were able to reintroduce condors. They pretty much just released them. They actually trialed it by using Andean condors, which are much more common. They only use females, so they wouldn't breed. They were able to re-release them, and then they were released back in 1991 and 1992 back into the wild. So that was a great way that zoos and conservation has worked in to help species, especially condors. Condors are a very famous example of how zoos can help save species, since they were all taken in and then bred in captivity. Los Angeles Zoo, there's a few zoos that have worked with condors. It's still really, really interesting. But they still had some obstacles to their recovery. Things such as poaching, lead poisoning, DDT poisoning, power lines, egg collecting, habitat destruction have all been issues to their recovery. But luckily there's been efforts to use non-lead bullets and other conservation efforts to try and help protect them. But luckily they have been doing quite well. There have been lots of milestones. So back in the early, late 80s, there was only 22 left, and then they were also caught in captivity. Now there is believed to be about 500 condors living in the wild. So the official population as of December 2016 is about 446, with about 276 wild condors and 170 in captivity. So they believe to be the habitat now is probably about 500, 600. So like mostly in the wild, about 300-400 in the wild and about 200 in captivity, which is quite interesting. But yeah, they've been reintroduced into places in Mexico as well. So there's still breeding there. There's 3 chicks born at the Calapipa Zoo in Mexico, so there's a lot of it there. And then they've been reintroduced into a lot of areas to help with the population, of course. So that's really cool. So a great example of how zoos help species and why zoos are important. So yeah, if zoos weren't around, the condor would have gone extinct, which is a very sad thing because they're really, really cool animals. And I love these guys. They're really, really awesome. So that's another cool animal we get to talk about. Another Great Cakes mod. I love Great Cakes mod, doing all sorts of really cool birds and extinct animals. Really just giving us some really awesome material to work with. So next up, last but certainly not least, we've got a mod by Leaf. We have got the Dugong. How can you not love a Dugong? So let's have a look at these wonderful guys. This is a Dugong. Wonderful, wonderful. So the dugong is a marine mammal and one of the 4 living species in Sardinia. So that includes the 3 species of manatee, and the only other living representative, its closest relative, the Steller sea cow, went extinct in the 18th century by hunting, which is a little bit sad. So these guys are sirens or sea cows. And the only herbivorous marine mammals, and the only group of herbivorous mammals that have become aquatic. Sirens have a great big history. They evolved about 50 million years ago, and there's been lots of different extinct species, and luckily they still survive today, as dugongs and the 3 species of manatees. Sadly, the Steller sea cow didn't make it, which was a really cool animal. They got to about like 9 to 10 meters long. Really, really huge animals, like basically the size of a killer whale, which is really interesting. So people were curious about where the word dugong comes from. Dugong comes from the Vishurian word dugong, which is kind of just the native word for them. Then they actually didn't come from the Malay word of Dunang, which means the sea. But they're also called sea camels, sea pigs, or sea cows. Sea cows are more common. They're the only living member of the family Dugongidae, and the only one of the 4 extinct species of Sardinia left, as I mentioned. And they're not closely related to other marine mammals like whales and dolphins. These guys are actually a siren, so they're more closely related to elephants. They're an Afrothea, and they share a group with like hyraxes and the aardvark, which is, as I mentioned, they live in, they are Afrothea. And fossil records show that these guys were paired in the Eocene. And they obviously the closest relative, the Steller sea cow, would have split in the Miocene. And sadly, the Steller sea cow went extinct recently. And there's actually been some research into genetics. So these are really old species, I believe about 8 million years old. So they've been around a long time. And there've been lots of switching between their genetics. So they've got a very interesting morphology as well. They're quite large with a long body, as you can see here. It tapers at the end, very, like a torpedo. In terms of their skin, they have a pale cream color at birth, but then darkens to brownish to dark grey with age. They also the color can change because of algae that grows on their skin. Their body is sparsely covered in hair, but is a common fate that allows them to feel for the environment, almost like a lateral line. And these hairs are most developed around the mouth, where they have a horseshoe-shaped lip, which is like a muzzle, almost like the equivalent of a trunk on an elephant that they use to manipulate the environment and use it to rip up plants to eat them. And also, very unlike manatees, these guys have tails. I know they're on land, but this is because it's on the seal rig. But these guys have tails very similar more to whales and dolphins than to manatees. So they've got a tail fluke that's much better adapted for swimming around in the ocean, very much similar to more like a whale than, as I mentioned, manatee. And they also lack nails on their flippers, unlike manatees, which is interesting. So they seem to be a little bit more better adapted for pelagic as well, the pelagic lifestyle. Typically, Dugong's brain actually is about 300 grams, or about 11 ounces, which is quite small, but they're still quite smart. They have limited vision, but quite acute hearing. The ears, they're able to hear, very much like on the sides of their heads, they got like pinnae, but they're able to hear very similar to like whales and things do. They don't echolocate though. They have two teats under each flipper, very similar to like elephants and manatees. And they actually have testes are not external, so everything is inside their body. They have a slit where they're able to do it. They've also got very large lungs that actually extend to be as far down in their kidneys and is highly elongated to cope with saltwater environment. So they've got big kidneys. In terms of the skull, they've got a very interesting skull. They've got a downturned premaxilla, and they also have this really big, all these muscles support that really, really big lip that they use to manipulate things. They also have their teeth do not continuously go back like horizontal tooth replacement, and they have two incisors in males that will come out during puberty. The female's tusks will continue to grow without emerging into puberty, and sometimes will come later in her life. But males typically have a little bit bigger tusks, which is interesting. And very interesting as well, like other ceridians, they have pachystosis, which is where their rims and long bones are kind of really big and contain little to no marrow. And they have really heavy bones that allow them to sink to the bottom of the ocean. So in terms of size, we'll see if these guys will actually start swimming for us. They're probably not going to. I think we'll speed up time a bit to wait for them. Come on. I might just move the male, I guess, and move them in the water. Because we don't want to just see them sleeping all the time. Oh, I can't move them in the water. Alright, we'll just make them swim. Yeah, you're gonna play me like that then. Anyway, we'll just carry on. He's gonna go in the water, hopefully. Anyway, so dugongs are typically found in coastal waters around the western Pacific to the eastern coast of Africa, and around 140,000 kilometers of shoreline in the south of the 20 degrees north and south of the equator. So they're quite a wide range. They believe that their range corresponds a lot with seagrass, and it's believed they have a distribution that was probably quite a bit wider. The full size of their former range is unknown, and is believed to be their current populations restoring the historical limits, which are quite highly fragmented. And their distribution between the warmer periods of the Holocene may actually be a little bit wider than today, but they're typically found around the waters of 37 different countries. But records number those shows to be lower, so they don't have that many, but they're quite well spread out. But they typically like warm waters around coasts, with large numbers coincide with protected bays. And they're the only strictly marine herbivore, and all species of manatee use fresh water to a degree, but they can tolerate brackish water and can be found in coastal wetlands, and they can find habitats where there's seagrasses. They're typically only found in waters at depths about 10 meters, although they can be found in areas where they can travel as far as 37 meters where there's deep seagrasses that they can feed on. But the largest populations are in Australia, with believed to be the population of Shark Bay to be about 10,000 dugongs, and probably about 50,000 dugongs across Australia. And there are also occasional visits to the Gulf Coast, but that's where the most of them as well. The second largest population lives around the Persian Gulf, and is believed to be between about 5,800 to 7,000, which is quite interesting as well. But they, as I mentioned, we'll get into why they're endangered. But other populations, herds of East Africa and South Asia, had populations of up to hundreds of dugongs. Some other small populations have been found around the place, like Vietnam, things like that. But there's been obviously some declines in some populations, especially around the Northern Pacific. There is a small population that lives around Taiwan that is very endangered, about 50 or fewer dugongs. And there's also a population that lived in the Mediterranean that is considered extinct. So these guys are quite long-lived. The oldest specimen of dugong found is about 73 years old. I want to see if this is the male. Yeah, this is the male. And they have few natural predators, though they may be predated by animals such as crocodiles, killer whales, and sharks, especially the young. A dugong has thought to be died from a stingray barb as well, which is quite interesting. And although they are quite social animals, they are usually solitary or found in pairs due to the availability of seagrass beds to support large populations. Though there have been gatherings of lots of dugongs occasionally found, but they don't last long. And there's actually not much known about dugong behavior. They can go about 6 minutes without breathing, though 2.5 minutes is more typical. And they've been known to rest their tails on their tails and breathe with their head. They can dive a maximum about 39 meters or 128 feet, but typically dive about 10 meters, where most of their obviously food is, with the seagrasses. And they've been known to communicate through chips and whistles and barks and other sounds that echo underwater, and it amplifies as well. They also, visual communication is quite limited, and they use activities such for lecking, so they'll obviously, males will follow females. And mothers and calves are almost in constant physical contact, and the calf will often be known to reach out to touch their mothers for reassurance, which is cute. They are semi-nomadic. They'll often travel long distances for food, but stay in a certain range throughout their lives. Large numbers often move from one area to another, and their movements can change depending on the availability of seagrasses, and it can be more localized or more open. Just depends on, the seagrasses really. Often travel between foraging grounds between bays or warmer oceanic areas. Just depends, Some have been seen sound as far south as Sydney, which is interesting. So dugongs being referred to sea cows is kind of because of their diet of seagrasses. So they eat all sorts of different seagrasses. They'll ingest the whole plant, including the root, although it's impossible when they feed on just leaves. The wide variety of seagrasses have been found in their stomachs. So they also eat algae when seagrass is scarce. Although they are almost completely herbivorous, they have been seen eating invertebrates such as sea squirts and jellyfish and things like that. And some actually feed on vertebrates such as polychaetes, which is quite interesting as well. Most dugongs do not feed on lush areas, but where are more sparse. So they kind of areas the seabed, but they do prefer kind of that low fiber, high nitrogen seagrass to maximize the nutrients as well. But they've also got quite a specialized, digestive system, a specialized diet, so that only certain seagrass meadows can support dugongs, and they may actually search out for certain seagrasses as well, as I mentioned. But they typically like to feed on low fiber, high nitrogen seagrasses, where they typically find them, but they will be a little bit more generally when they need. So let's have a look at the cute little baby. How can you not love a cute little baby dugong? Oh, no. There we are. So, parental care. So, a dugong reaches sexual maturity about 8 to 18, which is a lot older than a lot of other species of mammals. And the way that females know how a male has reached sexual maturity by the eruption of his tusks and when testosterone reaches a high enough level. The age when a female can first give birth is disputed, but some studies range between 10 to 6, while this place is early as 6. And there's evidence that male dugongs will lose fertility at older ages, and despite the longevity, they can live about 50 years or more. Females will only give birth to a few times during their lives and invest a lot of time into their young, and the times between births can be between 2.4 to 7 years. So mating behavior will vary a lot in different areas. With some populations, males will establish territory where the females and estrus will visit. In areas, the male will try to press the female and while defending the area from other males, which is known as lecking. And they'll fight each other. They'll even attempt to mate with the same female. They'll inflict injuries on the female or to each other. And during this, they've copulated multiple males and fought a male to try and increase this chance of copulation. Females typically will give birth after about a 13 to 15 month gestation to a single calf, and birth will typically occur in very shallow water. Everybody knows we're almost on shore when giving birth. As soon as the young is born, the mother will push it to the surface to take a breath. And newborns will be already about about 4 feet long, or about 1.2 meters, and weigh about 30 kilograms, which is quite interesting. That's not a baby. This is the baby. Let's have a look at the cute little baby here. Look at this little cutie. I love him. Anyway. Once born, they will actually stay with their mothers, quite close to their mother, and then they will nurse for about 14 to 18 months, although they can eat seagrass soon after birth. And then the calf will only leave its mother once it's matured, so they do spend a lot of time investing in their baby, which is interesting. But yeah, interesting how humans have had an interesting relationship with dugongs. We have actually Neolithic paintings of dugongs. People eat them or consider them like mermaids because, sailors, the story of mermaids coming from dugongs and manatees and things like that, which is quite interesting. So really, really cool. But sadly, they have declined a lot in recent times, which is a little bit sad. They're considered vulnerable, but most of the reason these guys have been at risk is all sorts of human factors. So things such as Anthropocene. Oh, I was going to say, is that not at proper speed? I think it might have been going a little fast, but that's okay. Oh, there's the parents. They're eating. But yeah, a lot of issues of affect these guys, such as habitat degradation, hunting, fishing, like getting caught in gill nets, shark nets as well. It's from boats, environmental degradation, industrialization. Oil spills has been a big issue for some dugongs. Also destruction, sewage and pollution as well. But there's not many in captivity. There's about Queensland. They have parks where you can go see them, and even Aboriginal people are not allowed to hunt them. But they're expensive to keep in captivity due to the long time mothers will take to care of their young and the ability to grow the seagrass that dugongs eat in aquariums. So they typically will feed them things like lettuce. But only one orphan calf has actually been successfully reared in captivity. But outside worldwide, there's only 3 dugongs held in captivity, with a female living in the Toba Aquarium in Japan, and a male lived there as well until he died on 10th of February 2011. The second resides in SeaWorld Indonesia, which was actually been rescued from a fisherman's net and treated. And the last one is a male that is at the Sydney Aquarium. I've seen both of them at the Sydney Aquarium, which resided until he was a juvenile. And then the second dugong sadly lived there until she died in 2018, which is a little bit sad. But yeah, they're quite hard to keep in captivity, but still cool to keep in Planet Zoo, and a really cool animal that Leaf has made, to give us a really, really cool animal to look at. And I just love talking about dugongs. It's the animal I've wanted to talk about for a while. And now, all we need now is the Steller sea cow. I really want to talk about those guys. I love Steller sea cows. So George the Dugong, thank you very much for being a willing participant in our discussions. So yeah. I think this is a great place to end the video. So thank you, Leaf, for this mod, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Great Cakes, Viral Cyclops, Leaf, Nick, Tosco, and everyone, Viral Cyclops. You all did a wonderful job. So yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys will like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.